Hello and welcome to today's webinar. Thank you so much for joining us. The question at hand today, how far should you push the boundaries in accelerating risk decisions? A challenging topic, no doubt. We have two phenomenal guest speakers with us today to introduce us into it and to get us going. So let me waste no time. My name is Peter Finter. I'm our moderator for today's discussion, and I'm joined by Joanna Soles and Dave Stapleton. Joanna is the Senior Director of Information Security and CISO for both corporate and global functions at PepsiCo, where she's responsible for vulnerability management, compliance and policy adherence, and security awareness. She has an extensive background in IT and cybersecurity, as well as an impressive track record for improving security programs. Prior to joining PepsiCo, she previously held leadership roles at Anthem and AT&T. Joanna, thank you so much for joining us this morning. It's wonderful to have you with us. I'm also joined by Dave Stapleton, who I may say is a staple of our webcast series. We're delighted to have you back, Dave. Dave is a tenured cybersecurity risk professional with experience in both the public and private sectors. He began his cyber career at the Department of Health and Human Services, where he developed and managed risk and compliance functions for the Food and Drug Administration and the Indian Health Service. He currently serves as VP and Chief Information Security Officer here at CyberGRX, where he leads the security operations team. We are delighted to have you with us again, Dave. Thank you for joining us. And let us get straight to it, shall we? Maybe just to set a little bit of context, Joanna, would you mind just giving us an idea of your third-party ecosystem? PepsiCo, we all know, global super brand. Tell us about that portfolio and how has it changed over the last little while? And maybe just give a sense of scale for vetting and onboarding new vendors. What does your process actually entail?
So for PepsiCo, we have tens of thousands of third parties, first of all. We are absolutely global in scale and very large. The business is innovating really, really rapidly, constantly engaging with third parties across the globe to help deliver their strategic initiatives. And so the third-party landscape is never static. It's constantly changing as well. And so we have to be able to really be able to move at the speed of business, which is what we're going to talk about a little bit and more in the webinar. So what we do is, we have a third-party due diligence process like most or if not all companies around the world who are engaging with third parties. And so, it's always a balance for us as far as how much due diligence can we provide to the business, to our internal corporate functions like procurement, legal, that sort of thing, to make those decisions rapidly and be able to make sure that we constantly monitor the critical third parties that we're engaging and that sort of thing. So as far as onboarding, we have a process whereby our procurement team uses we have a global set of information security requirements. We use assessments to inform those to see if we need to add additional language in at the contract signing stage. And then for those connected third parties, those that have our critical data, that sort of thing, as well as our single source type of suppliers, we like to monitor those throughout the engagement and the life cycle.
Indeed, so full lifecycle management, but critical decision points at every step along the way. And one of the challenges we know is having the right information to hand at the point at which the business needs to make decisions. And indeed, to your point, Joanna, we're going to delve deep into that momentarily. But maybe, Dave, just to get your perspective, as a CISO, you work with all of our customers and you see very different approaches to the procurement process, albeit the same problems to be solved. What are some of the challenges that we should be thinking about when it comes to vetting and onboarding third parties?
Sure, yeah, so there's many challenges. I think probably break them down into three categories. I'm going to try anyway. One is around visibility. For the security program, how do we find out about new vendors? If you have really sticky processes that are well ingrained and you work with an organization whose cultures that we're following those, maybe that's not as big of an issue. But with the continued popularity of SaaS platforms, for example, someone with a corporate credit card or even a personal credit card can quite easily spin up an account, start processing data and moving things around. And if you don't have the right monitoring tools in place, that kind of thing can breeze by pretty quickly. That's in opposition to the very large enterprise types of software, some of the more critical ones that Joanna was just mentioning. it's almost impossible for the security team not to be aware of the fact that, like, okay, we're adding a bunch of interconnections into our corporate environment from this new service or this new third party or vendor that we're coming into. So I think the first challenge is that visibility. How do you know when there's a need for or a request for a new vendor or third party in the first place? I think second is time, and maybe that's the crux of a lot of what we're talking about in today's webinar. But do you have the appropriate amount of time to collect and analyze the necessary data to understand the risk that's associated with this particular third party? Do you know how your business is intending to use them? And can you put all that together fast enough to be successful for the business? Because the business wants it to be done yesterday, and obviously that's not exactly realistic. So there's a lot of pressure to move fast. So I think time is another big challenge. And then the last one that I'll mention, and there's probably a dozen more, but the last one I'll mention is around authority. Do you have the ability from the security chair to slow down or pause, or even in some cases, maybe these are fairly extreme cases, reject a procurement process request based on unacceptable or unknown risks that you've identified through whatever process you have for doing that due diligence? Without that in place, there's a lot of conversations about how effective you can actually be in the role and why are you doing it in the first place? Are you checking a box for somebody so they can say you did, or are you actually trying to reduce risk? So I would say those are the top three that come to mind for me as far as challenges in this process.
And I think time is such a critical component, isn't it? Because we know that there's a window of opportunity when our voice can be heard, where we can have an impact on the business. And if we miss that window, being able to impact the business subsequent to a decision being made to onboard a new vendor becomes much more difficult, doesn't it? Joanna, I'm wondering, in your experience, what are the ramifications when risk decisions take an extended amount of time, as historically we know that they have tended so to do? How has that impacted you in your?
Yeah, definitely. For us at PepsiCo, like I said, our business is just moving at such a rapid pace. In order to, there's a lot of constraints on the business around the inflation for us as a CPG company, and just keeping pace with our competition and that sort of thing. So if we take too long to provide meaningful feedback on the security posture of a third party, then we're going to lose the ability to provide any feedback at all. Because what they do is they'll go around us, they'll sign the contract, and then they'll engage us, which is, a terrible conversation to have with them, that, oh, you shouldn't have signed that contract, or, hey, we needed to put some extra language in there to protect PepsiCo, and you didn't allow us to do that because you skipped our process, or you forgot to engage us, or whatever the case may be. So we want to make security easy for them. We want to be a trusted partner to the business. We want to show them the value of our information security organization, and specifically the third-party risk function that we want to provide them with information. We don't want to slow them down, but we want to give them as good of information as we possibly can at the time we have it. And then we can always, go back and make that information more robust as we go along through the process. But at least we start the security conversation with them. And the vendor knows that we at PepsiCo care about security, because we're able to talk about it. We're not even able to talk about it if we can't give them information in a timely manner.
Yeah. It's such an important point you're making. And, at the end of the day, we're trying to facilitate the business and the engagement with our third-party ecosystem. We want to build strong collaborative partnerships. We want to protect each other's data. That's clearly our motivation. But oftentimes, lack of data gets in the way. Our inability to know where we should be focusing our conversation and our dialogue with those third parties can be a key obstacle to success. So I want to move our conversation forwards to the topic at hand today, which is an innovation in the third-party risk management space, recently introduced on the CyberGRX platform, and that's the concept of predictive risk intelligence. And I know both of you have experience with it, but for the benefit of our audience, I should explain that predictive risk intelligence allows us to leverage the information that we've gathered through now more than 13,000 attested assessments in our database, with machine learning to factor in firmographic data, risk ratings, and threat intelligence from our partners' Risk Recon and Recorded Future, in order to be able to predict how a third party might answer a particular assessment question. And by virtue of the fact that we've acquired so much information around this area, we can now achieve more than a 90% accuracy rate, which is pretty significant. And we can talk more about how do we get to that level of accuracy. But the question at hand really is this: are you comfortable using data not generated by a human to make risk decisions? And I think it's a pretty timely question, isn't it? Because with all the talk about generative AI these days, can we foresee the day when predictive data eventually replaces assessments altogether? Well, that's a provocative question, but I'm going to ask you to hold that thought before you respond. We'll come back to it in a second, but I thought we could start by asking our audience a key question with our first poll. So I'm going to ask our pollster to bring it up. The question is this: would you use predictive data generated by a machine to make risk decisions? So 3 simple answers. Yes, I would. No, I wouldn't. I'm not sure. Please put your answers in now, and we're going to talk a bit about that question that I just raised. So maybe, Joanna, we could start with you on this one. Are you comfortable using data not generated by a human to make risk decisions? And what are the parameters around that level of comfort, if I may put it that way?
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, you're definitely opening a can of worms when you start throwing Chat GPT and generative AI into the mix.
How could we not? How could we not?
I'm not sure I'm ready to go that far with it, but what I will say is I'm a data girl. I've always been a data girl. I love using data to make decisions or to help inform decisions. So, whether that data is 100% accurate, 90% accurate, 50% accurate, you take what you can get at the time that you need it. And so I would rather have data that is predictive or not exact, hasn't been generated necessarily by a human, and then make the decision, be able to give that information on that security posture to my business, to my IT, my legal department, my procurement department. Let them, as long as you present it to them in that way, you don't present it to them as, hey, we know this for a fact. You present it to them as, you know what, we don't know for sure what their security posture is. This is what our data and our intelligence information is telling us. By the way, some of that intelligence information is based on industry incidents that have happened to those vendors and that sort of thing. So it's not, some of it is not, it's not 100% predictive. It's a mixture, right? It's a mixture of some of the actual information from the industry and that sort of thing as well. So we like to be able to provide that data as a first pass to our business, to our internal functions. And then based on that, we may recommend, hey, ask a few pointed questions to the vendor during the negotiations of the contract on this item, on their capabilities to secure the solution through MFA or whatever, if we're seeing some concerning things or some possible security gaps. And that's the way that we actually report it back to them. We don't report it back to them as fact. We report it back to them as we feel like they could have some potential security gaps in these areas. And these are areas that are critical to PepsiCo and to the solution. And we'd like you to, as you're going through the negotiations, we'd like you to ask a few more questions, that sort of thing, as opposed to saying, stop everything. Let's make the vendor go through a 500 question questionnaire assessment or whatnot. We may still decide to do that, based upon the criticality, based upon what we see in the predictive results, that sort of thing. There's always time for that. As long as we then incorporate a right to assess clause into our contract and some language that says they may need to remediate some things, then that buys us some time. And again, it also puts that vendor on notice that we care about security at PepsiCo.
Love that, Joanna.
Real quick, Peter.
Sorry, Dave, please go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, I just wanted to jump in because Joanna just dropped some knowledge on us, and I wanted to just highlight it in case it went over anyone's head. What she's talking about is a true risk-based approach to cybersecurity, specifically in relation to our utilization of third parties. That's so key to everything that we're talking about here. It's not just throw the book at everybody. and just, hope they can stomach it and get through it. It's what do we actually really care about? Where do we have reason to have concerns? And let's ask specific questions about specific risks that have real meaning to us. I think that's just fantastic. And I wish that more organizations had that approach. And I think it's just key to the whole conversation that we're having here. Another side effect of that is that you can engender a little bit of respect, I think, and maybe some appreciation from your third parties, but kind of like, hey, thanks for not sending me that 500 question spreadsheet. I really appreciate that you do care about risk. We care about risk too. And that conversation we felt was actually very additive and productive and valuable, instead of just being a roach checklist, that you just send to everybody. So anyway, I just wanted to jump in there right there because I thought that was brilliant.
I appreciate you doing that, Dave, because I feel as if one of the key things here is this ability to focus, be able to focus the conversation in areas which are higher value for both parties. It's important for the third parties that get frustrated when they're asked to provide the same information over and over. It's much more illuminating from their point of view to be able to talk about the specific issues that may exist in that particular relationship. And to your point, Joanna, to be, to recognize that actually security matters to both parties. And that's something which is appreciated, I think, on both sides. So we have our poll results for our first poll, and we're going to do a poll a little bit later on, but this one is interesting. It's suggesting that we have more people in favor of using predictive data than not favoring predictive data. So I'm wondering, does that come, and obviously for a lot of folks, it's still in the balance. We're not sure yet which way to go. It's early days and we're maybe thinking through the options. I hope this webinar is going to help you make some decisions about how you might use predictive data of this kind. I'm wondering, are there any surprises in that result? Dave, what strikes you from seeing those results?
Yeah, I don't know that it's super surprising. If anything, I may say that I'm a little surprised we've got 50% who are saying yes. I personally find a lot of value in predictive, but I know it's new and change is sometimes difficult, especially when you're talking to a lot of risk practitioners. So seeing that there's about half the audience who's already, I'm pretty sure that they want to use this kinds of capability and data is really encouraging, because I think, one of the constants of cybersecurity is we don't ever have enough resources, or at least we don't feel like we have enough resources. And if there's ways that we can make our process more efficient, let's do it. So it's great for me to see that, about half of folks are ready to kind of have that mindset and be a little innovative and get out there and try something new.
I think it's your risk appetite too. I know you didn't ask me a question here, but I think it's your risk appetite. I think those people who are not comfortable with it, they will very well could come from heavily regulated industries, and you can't really fault them for that, for wanting that to see and touch and feel that evidence. For me, where I struggle is the evidence is not always full scope of the entire security posture of that company's entire attack surface. It could be just a portion. It's also a point in time, and you just don't know. They're not going to give you, from our experience, a company's not going to give you their pen test results, which is what I really want to see. They're not going to give you their vulnerability management reports that come out of their vulnerability tracking tool. That's what I want to see, right? To be able to, they're going to give you things like policy and standards, and that's great. That's the basis and the foundation. But if they're not actually executing those policy and standards, or not executing them full scope, especially when it's the scope that you care about that's connected to your infrastructure, that's where that's where I think I like to see the predictive piece, or the threat intelligence, really is what I like to see. I hope that we have more threat intelligence data being added to our tools, our tool set and our tool belt. And you can't, in my opinion, you can't have enough data to be able to make a good decision.
I think that's such a great point you're raising, Joanna. And I think, we've thought about this idea of being compliance driven or regulation driven versus threat driven. And of course, in a regulated environment, there's no option but to be compliant. We are going to, we're going to have to meet minimum. But the question is, are we really managing risk, or are we simply ensuring that we are compliant? And as CISOs, as security and risk professionals, of course, we want to do both. And I was very interested to understand, Joanna, as obviously you are using predictive data now in your processes, I'm wondering, did you face any resistance to introducing that model? Because I'm sure many of your colleagues, this is a very new concept, a new idea. Maybe they didn't yet have confidence in being able to trust that data or to use it effectively in their own decision making. I'm wondering if you can help our audience understand kind of what are the challenges that need to be overcome to be able to successfully implement predictive risk intelligence in your enterprise.
So I think it depends. Of course, I come from a very large organization, right? So it depends on my stakeholder. So from a business perspective, it's been embraced with open arms. They're so happy to have something quickly, because we're able to deliver something to them in 1 to 5 days, as opposed to 30 to 90 days. It's game changing for us to be able to at least give them something. And it kind of buys us time to get the more detailed, full assessment if we determine we need one. Because we have our current program was not scalable. We just had way too many third parties all over the place. So difficult to risk rank them, because everybody thinks that their part of the business is critical and very important, and so just really hard to get them to do that. Now so we have very highly trained assessors at PepsiCo. Some of them came from very highly regulated environments, so for them it's been a big change. It's been a big change for them to go from, actually doing the assessing, but what it's doing is it's making them more strategic. It's freeing them up to be able to have those really good conversations with the business, because they have some kind of data to give them, as opposed to just beating on them to go get us to help the vendor to finish the assessment. It's a different conversation. It's now a conversation that says, hey, there's some potential security gaps here, but don't worry about these, because these are low, but we want to really focus on this, because this is what's going to really impact you. And so it's really garnered a seat at the table for us with our business, and it's really, I think, a more exciting job for our third-party assessors and our assessment team to not be pushing paperwork as much as they're able to take the results and analyze them and put them in context and explain them to the business. And so it's been fantastic.
I love that speed to decision making and the engagement component, where I think oftentimes our risk and security teams can feel a little bit separated from the business decision making processes, and to be able to be more engaged because of that timeliness of data makes such a difference. I'm wondering, Dave, as you look at the organization that you run, we're at a pretty different scale from PepsiCo, that's for sure. But I'm wondering, how has that impacted your ability to manage our third-party ecosystem, and how has predictive data helped you to serve the business better?
Yeah, it's I'm going to repeat a lot of what Joanna just said, so I'm not going to take a whole lot of time on this answer, but it is really about being able to engage with the rest of the business when there is opportunity to have a difference, to make a difference. And you cannot do that if it takes, as Joanna just said, 30 to 90 days to get a tested, full kind of questionnaire data back from a third-party vendor. The ship has sailed by that point, particularly because I think one of the things that we have in common is we both work for organizations that are highly innovative and they want to stay ahead of the competition, and we're trying to do things that are new and are going to really help the market. In order to do that, the entire business is always leaning into the idea of efficiency, and speed is an element of that. So if you stand in the way of those business leaders who have really good ideas about how we're going to propel our business into success, one, that's just not good security. Security shouldn't stop your business from being able to be successful. That's bad. If you found yourself in that position, something needs to change. So we want to stay out of that. And two, we want to avoid a situation where we encourage people, not intentionally, to round robin the security processes and basically cut us out of the loop completely. That shadow IT is certainly a risk. of not doing it well. So internally, we use it for the same things. Very almost immediate data that we can start to look at and think about from a risk-based approach. Is there something here that seems unacceptable or particularly worrisome? Can I articulate a risk scenario associated with this data that I'm receiving? If I can, it's probably worth a conversation, maybe with the business on internally on our side at CyberGRX, or maybe I want to go out and just reach out to that vendor directly and say, hey, I'm not hitting you with a questionnaire here, but I would like to hop on a call for maybe 15, 20 minutes and just talk through real quickly how you're handling your implementation of like multi-factor authentication. I'm just picking one out of the sky there. That is so direct, so specific. I think the third parties appreciate it, the business appreciates it, and the whole thing is happening just orders of magnitude faster than before. So that's kind of how we've been leveraging it internally.
Yeah, that sounds phenomenal. And we'll come back to that in 1 second, but I want to ask our audience to participate in our second poll question today. Having heard the conversation so far, would you now use predictive data generated by a machine to make risk decisions? Let's see if any of our unsures or knows have changed their minds over the course of the conversation. While that's going on, perhaps we can talk a little bit about what do we do when our organization, we think, will never go for a predictive model. What do we do then? What advice, and maybe Joanna, I could ask you, what advice would you have to your compatriots out in the risk and security world who are struggling with this, who are facing perhaps a more conservative organization, perhaps not quite so innovative and go ahead? Any tips or suggestions as to how to sort of move the ball forwards in their situation?
I think you have to, no matter what methodology you use, no matter what tool you use, you have to be a trusted partner with the business, and you have to give them something. Whether it's, you can't, it's just not acceptable for them to engage you and for you to say, go submit a ticket, I'll get back to you in 90 days. That's just never a good response. They're never going to come back to you again for any advice. So whatever methodology you use, if you do feel like, because of the regulation, the conservative nature, the risk appetite that is just not there in your company, what I would say is pick the top security requirements that are must-haves for you and focus on those and see if you can either use some kind of tool to get some insight quickly on just those specific requirements, or you can send a very short questionnaire to the vendor or something to work with them to figure out on just those key requirements what they're able to do, what their security capabilities are, and what they're able to do. And then the contract, the second thing would be the contract. Always have some kind of right to assess. If you don't have time to assess them right that second, as long as you've got that right to assess language in the contract, you can always go back to it. If they have if they cause you a security incident, you want to be able to pull that contract out and say, hey, I'm assessing you now. That sort of thing. You hope it doesn't come to that and that you've already been able to predict that, but that's what I would say is really have a conversation within internally in your company, know your appetite, know what those key requirements are.
Awesome, Joanna, thank you so much. Well, Pollster, if you wouldn't mind bringing up our poll results. Well, look at that, you guys. Very compelling and convincing, clearly, in today's conversation, as we've seen a significant shift of people towards it. And frankly, I think for all the reasons that you have been highlighting, the fact is that we want to help the business move forwards more rapidly. We want to give them something rather than nothing or have them wait for us. And we don't want to miss the window of opportunity to influence the decisions at the point where we can make an impact. Pre-contract. We want to be able to manage that relationship successfully through its life cycle. And thank you both for helping us think that through. I think one parting shot from each of you would be wonderful. Dave, what would be your suggestion for our listeners? One takeaway from today's conversation for you that would help them move towards a more agile risk decision-making environment?
Yeah, so I'm going to do one that's maybe a little different from the rest of the conversation, but taking those requirements that Joanna just talked about, understanding what those are, and then find the gatekeepers and partner with them. A lot of times it's your finance teams, your legal teams. Those are the ones that are going to help you make sure that things don't sneak by. And so you have that opportunity as soon as possible to start to take action, whether it be with predictive or other types of tools.
Love that. Thank you, Dave. Joanna, what would be your word of advice for our audience today?
I would say be a trusted partner to the business, make security easy for them, and know that you're there in their corner to enable them. not to slow them down.
Fantastic. Joanna, Dave, thank you so much for joining us. Listeners, thank you for being part of today's webinar. Please come visit us at cybergrx.com to learn more. Predictive risk intelligence is an innovation from CyberGRX, which we hope will be of huge benefit to you as you manage your third-party ecosystems more effectively. And we look forward to you joining us next time for our next webcast. But for today, have a great